the F1 Focus Podcast with MV Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.
Welcome back to Formula One Focus, our Formula One focused podcast with my friend Hendrik Verwoerd. Hendrik, what an exciting weekend. It was one for the ages.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just amazing how São Paulo always throws up an interesting race, or virtually always. I'm battling to think back to a race that was boring in São Paulo at Interlagos. I mean, I've been there twice, and on both occasions, it was absolutely amazing. That was 2006 and 2007. So we're talking 18 years ago. And ever since, I think, we've seen some great drives. I mean, Max Verstappen, obviously, when he came back in the wet last year in 2024, I remember even 2016 was that his first race in São Paulo, where also wet, when he was showing everybody else that they should go the go-kart lines. That was in his first year, basically, at the Red Bull. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that he was able to come, from the pit lane to third position last Sunday. But, one has to also acknowledge the fact that Red Bull almost completely cocked it up. They completely got the setup of the car wrong. He was nowhere the first time, virtually in living memory that Red Bull wasn't able to get both cars through Q1. And so Red Bull then decided that was because they made some changes after practice and after the car wasn't competitive in the sprint race. And so they made some changes, and that made the car even worse for qualifying for the Grand Prix. And that meant both the cars basically dropped out in Q1. And then they made another huge change to I think both cars, but at least to Max Verstappen's car with a brand new, completely new power unit. All the elements of the power unit were brand new, and they changed the car's setup completely as well, which then transformed the car. All of these things together. But of course, the driver still has to make it work, and that is exactly what makes Max Verstappen such a great driver. When he gets the car that he can make work, he just pulls a hair out of the hat. And what a fantastic drive it was. And it was nail-biting towards the end. The young Kimi Antonelli, would he be able to hold back Max, on a charge? And yes, he did. And I think Kimi Antonelli also answered a few questions last weekend. So, a great drive. Lots of controversy, obviously, with the Ferrari situation. Something we can talk about. And then, of course, the other big talking point was the penalty that was given to Oscar Piastri for his attempt to overtake on the inside of turn one after the safety car or after the red flag restart. So, lots of things to talk about, lots of things to discuss. And that is great. That is what I think Grand Prix racing is all about.
Talking about Max, you also have to keep in mind he got a puncture at the beginning of the race and he had to pit early. And at the end, I was thinking, oh my word, two dogs fight over a bone and the third one comes. It's not the first time we've said it this season. Max, I thought he was going to stay out. But Red Bull said afterwards that he wouldn't have made it. But I mean, at one stage, I thought he was going to win this race. I mean, it would have been the first time in Formula One history that someone started from pit lane and won a race.
Yeah, and it would have been Max.
Of course, it would be Max. Who else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, if one delves a little bit deeper into the way that they ran the strategy for Max, he started off in the pit lane on hard tires, and then I think he got the puncture, and then he was forced to come in. Then he could change. He was able to then follow the rule that you have to run in dry conditions. You have to run two compounds. So he could then change to the ideal tire, which was the medium tire. And in fact, he could then, when he had to stop again, he could still stay on mediums, where most of the other drivers who didn't have that problem were forced into a medium and a soft, and again a medium, or two mediums and a soft, or a soft and two mediums, whatever. Those strategies. But he was then able to use the maximum benefit of being able to use the medium tires for both his main stints in the race. And then he only had to come in shortly before the end of the race to change the soft tires, and he could use that to the maximum advantage as well. So yeah, things did work out for him, but the fact again is, he was still the man behind the steering wheel who had to make it work, and that is exactly what he did. That's all the greats are like that. You get the opportunity, but you have to make it work, and they do it. Michael Schumacher used to do that. Ayrton Senna used to do that. Alain Prost used to do that. Lewis Hamilton many occasions, had to make certain strategies work in certain conditions that they were in. Had to make it work where their teammate, I'm not talking about Hamilton specifically, but in many cases, the teammate in similar circumstances was not able to do it.
Yeah, talking about, all-time greats, Fernando Alonso started on hards and he went nowhere. I mean, they had to do something different. And clearly that puncture that Max had at the beginning of the race was sort of a blessing in disguise, because I think if you had to stick to the hards, he would have been nowhere anyway. And I'm interested to know why the tires make such a difference. Why we saw Lando overtaking Max when he was on newer tires. And there was a clear speed difference, not just in the corners where you'd expect the tires to play a role, but down the straight. Why is a car slower with worn tires down the straight? Does it make any difference? Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that depends on how he can exit the final corner, before that straight. And on your worn tires, obviously, you're not going to have the grip to be able to exit at maximum speed. And if you don't have the grip, that penalizes you right down the main straight. And that's not only at Interlagos, but as a general principle. Your top speed that you are able to run at down a straight, that is really dependent on probably the two corners before that. In many cases, depending on the circuit. So, look, I mean, why did certain cars perform better on Sunday than at other circuits? It's, again, we've seen that many times this last season, that circumstances or conditions, rather, track conditions and ambient temperatures, track temperature, wind, all those kind of things make a big difference, and did in fact last weekend as well. So it's the dark art of gaining the most performance or getting the most performance out of the car in modern Formula One. It works sometimes for certain teams, and it doesn't work for the same teams, at other venues. And it's not always possible to actually put a finger on the solution, because if it was possible, then it would never happen. Then everybody would know what the solution was.
Yeah. That's true. Talking about, new things and all that, Max basically had a brand new car, new engine, like you said, everything else. And that's all. I was surprised how big a role that played in terms of the performance, firstly. And then secondly, Andreas Stella had a lot to say about the fact that, asked the question, would that engine that's now outside of the allowed number of engines that they're allowed to use for the season, will it have a cost cap implication? Explain that to me. Isn't Red Bull a works team? Do they get the engines for free? What's the story there?
No, they pay for the engines. Honda still, make those engines, or the power units, the complete power units, and Red Bull pay for it. So the question, I think, is a valid one from Andrea Stella, because if you can change an engine for performance reasons, not for reliability reasons, because you can, if you do that, you still take a penalty, but it doesn't then fall under your cost cap for the season. If you take a new power unit, so it doesn't have cost cap implications. But if you do it for performance reasons, then it should fall under the cost cap, because the whole basic principle, or the whole idea behind the cost cap, is to stop teams from spending as much as possible on gaining performance. So I would say, logically, taking the principle of what lies behind the cost cap, yes, if you take an engine or power unit or whatever for performance reasons, yes, it should fall under your cost cap, and that should limit teams from doing that. Because if it doesn't fall under the cost cap, then every team can at any point, just change the engines, and then you have a whole new war of budgets again, like we had in the past. And that is exactly what the cost cap is about, to try and stop that. Whether it actually gave the car that much of a performance advantage, I think that's debatable. It's probably, I think Mekis was asked about that afterwards, and he said, look, it's probably not only the new power unit, but also the setup changes, and all of that is kind of a package that they had, and the whole package together made a difference. It's not just the one element that would have made the difference. But he said, and quite rightly, is again, these days with such small margins between the teams and the cars, every little bit makes a difference. And whether that whole package that they had for Max made a difference of a tenth or even 2/10 of a second on a lap, that's a huge margin of advantage. I don't know what it exactly was, and I don't think Mackey's was willing to quantify the advantage that they had. But yes, I think this is a thing that should be debated, and there's no clarity on that. Various media outlets have asked the FIA to explain. Now, there's a lot of secrecy surrounding the cost cap for specific teams. They don't, and I think rightly so as well, because you cannot throw everything open into the public as far as spending is concerned, what they are doing, because then everybody knows everybody else's secret. So you cannot have that, but you can ask in principle, and obviously we need an answer from the FIA. And as we record this thing, we don't know the answer from the FIA yet. Does a performance-related engine change or power unit change, or even the other elements, just the individual elements, whether it's the battery or any other element, if it's for performance reasons, does that fall under the cost cap? And it should, as far as I'm concerned.
Talking about McLaren, Lando Norris must have, taken something to help him, because suddenly he's a changed man, almost dominated in Mexico, won comfortably, didn't dominate as much, but again, led every single session of this past weekend, including the sprint qualifying, winning the sprint race, qualifying and pole, and winning the race. I wonder what's changed there, because we see very clearly, I've spoken about this before, the so-called Iceman, Oscar Piastri, is showing definite cracks now, clearly sort of succumbing to the pressure, I suppose, even if it's only his third season. So McLaren looks like they might make it. What's the chances of Lando not being champion, do you think, with the 3 races remaining?
Well, I think that chance of him not making it depends solely on himself. People have said it, and I think it's valid. It's his championship now to lose. Ever since the Baku weekend, when things went completely south for Oscar, Oscar hasn't been the same one. I've been pretty reluctant to say, after 1 or 2 events, it's a given that yes, the cracks are showing and that he's buckling under the pressure and that sort of. But that's now been continuing for a number of events. So I think I'm starting to acknowledge the fact that as you say, the Iceman, the unperturbed Oscar Piastri of the first half of the season is not there anymore. He hasn't unlearned, if that's an English word, unlearned how to drive. But I think it's the racing situation, and things seem to get to him. I do think he was unfortunate last Sunday with the penalty that was given to him by the stewards, because he was going for a legitimate overtake. It didn't work out. And he was penalized for that, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But things do not tend to seem to go wrong for Oscar all the time now, the last few races. So it's Lando's one to lose. Of course, things can change around. That the gap is 24 points. There's 25 up for grabs for a victory. So if Lando, for any reason, has a non-finish and Oscar wins that particular race, then the whole situation is open again. So it's certainly not all over. It's going to be difficult, but with the current points allocation, the point system that we're having at the moment, with, as I said, 25 for a win and further down, it's the gap seems large, but it is not necessarily as large as it seems. It can be overturned. Max, I think, is starting to understand that he's probably not in it anymore. And if we look at it the next race at Las Vegas, if he has another bad weekend in terms of results, then Max is probably going to be out of it for all practical reasons. So I think that gap is what now, 49 points. So to the lead. So that is larger than the one where we said earlier on, when Oscar was still leading and Max was 34 points behind, and he was able to theoretically able to catch him. That gap now to Lando is 49 points. So 3 races to go, including 1 sprint. That's, 85 points up for grabs. Is it 85? 83. 83 points. So I think for Max, it's getting less and less viable. I think Oscar is still in it. Things can still turn around, but for that he needs some good luck for himself and some bad luck for Lando.
Oscar, if it's up to Oscar, the things that he did this weekend, that overtake he tried on Kimi, was it on? Did he make a mistake? He locked up. He got the penalty. From my point of view, it should have either been a racing incident, or they should have shared. Both Kimi and Oscar should have probably got a little bit of a penalty there. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the thing. These days with And there's a lot of unhappiness in Formula One circles. And I've got to say I share that, because the stewards seem to be applying the guidelines, the racing guidelines. We haven't seen a lot of that. It has been published. So I think, if one goes and search for it, you will see the document with the guidelines. But they remain guidelines. They are not regulations. They are not racing rules. So if a guideline is per definition something that one uses to guide you, but it doesn't mean that you have to apply that to the letter of the guideline. And that is what the stewards are doing these days, it seems. Applying a guideline to the letter of what that guideline says. The guideline says that particular guideline for that particular situation, and we've spoken about this before, is if you want to overtake a car on the inside of a corner, then you have to have your front wheel next to the mirror of the car that's being overtaken at the apex of the corner. And if you have that situation, then the guy who's being overtaken, the car on the outside, obviously has to leave you enough space and enough room. That wasn't the case in this particular situation, and we know that because Lando got penalized. And he was, according to the letter of the guideline, he wasn't with his front wheel right next to the mirror of Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes. So therefore, he wasn't entitled to the space, and therefore he got the penalty, and that is what the letter of the guideline says. But again, it's a guideline. You have to take into account the fact that it was the first corner after a restart, after a rolling restart. That the first thing. So you would expect the drivers to challenge each other into what is one of the few overtaking spots on that track. And Kimi did not get such a good restart, and Oscar got a better restart, but he was on the inside. So when you're on the inside, you have to brake earlier because, first of all, you're not on the racing line, and secondly, your arch through the corner is much tighter. So you have to brake earlier. That means that, per definition, taking that into account, if Oscar was right next to Kimi down right up to the point of braking, he would have had to brake earlier, and therefore that means coming to the apex, he would not have been alongside Kimi as per the guideline. And that is the kind of situation that I think that the steward should have taken into account and said, okay, that's what the guideline says, but for this particular reason, this was simply a racing incident. This was a driver who was quite entitled to go for that gap because the gap was there. It is also a driver that is battling for the World Championship, and he will therefore obviously be more motivated to try and make up positions. So, those are the kind of things that I think the steward should take into account when they come to a conclusion about penalty or not. That should not have been a penalty. That should have been seen as a racing incident. And Oscar should have been able to keep his second position on the road. Who knows what would have happened then in terms of the rest of the race? We will never know that. And this is very frustrating. We touched on something like this, I think, on a previous occasion, where I said, the stewards are also in a difficult position because they cannot really take into account what the championship situation is. They cannot then say, okay, this is a championship battle, and we have to act or make our judgments accordingly. But in this case, that would have been one of the factors, certainly not the main factor that Oscar was, is part of the championship. I think the other factors in terms of the situation for that overtaking maneuver, I think those should have been much weightier factors to take into account. But it is what it is, and unfortunately, Oscar paid the penalty quite literally.
Let's just talk about rookies now. You talked about Kimi just now. Kimi, for the last couple of races, actually outshone George Russell on more than one occasion. George Russell supposedly, the next big thing. Kimi showing up that Toto Wolff's faith in him was not unwarranted. And then, of course, Bortoleto at his home race, you talk about pressure. Clearly, it got to him. Shame I felt so. So that was a big accident that he had there. Hadjar still doing well. I mean, the Racing Bulls did very well this weekend. Lawson seems like, I read somewhere that he's now supposedly not the favorite anymore to keep his seat. Tsunoda probably looks like being the favorite. And then, of course, for me, the standout rookie for the year, I know it's not maybe the most popular for him, but Oliver Behrman. He's a future superstar. What do you think of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the smallest team on the grid, and Ollie Behrman and Ocon, but on some occasions. But Ollie Behrman has been outperforming, I think, the potential of the Haas on numerous occasions. And we did see right at the beginning when he first stepped into the Ferrari as a replacement, and he scored points basically on debut. So he showed what he was able to do. And it's fantastic to see such youngsters coming through, and it's quite amazing for somebody of my age. And I'm not sure about you, but to think how young these guys are. I mean, they're 20, 21, and they're driving the world's fastest cars, and they're doing it well. They're competitive, and they are certainly some stars of the future. There's no doubt about that. It's great to see that. Yeah, Kimi Antonelli, I think, again, as somebody with a lot of potential and picked up by Toto Wolff earlier on in his career and nursed, and many people said that it was maybe too early to give him the seat this year, but I don't think Toto actually had any alternative. But it's starting to pay off now. There was an interesting analysis done by somebody else. It's not mine, but I think they got it spot on. Toto was asked, why does it seem that Antonelli is performing on tracks that he's never been on? He doesn't perform on tracks that he knows from junior categories. And Toto said, well, it's basically because the expectations are lower on tracks where he hasn't been on before. He hasn't raced in junior categories, or obviously not in Formula One before. So on tracks where he has raced before, the expectations are high, and in places like Monza, it's in front of his home crowd, so the expectations are extremely high, and therefore the pressure is extremely high. We saw that with Bortoleto. Also, home track. First time at home in front of seems like almost his entire close family, and obviously a very passionate home crowd. They are passionate. From experience, I can tell you it is the most amazing crowd atmosphere. Apart from Monza, I think those two are the crowd atmosphere top tracks. That's not good English, but anyway, you know what I mean. So, and the pressure would have been extremely high on poor Gabby Bartoletto, and it obviously showed that accident they had in the sprint race was frightening, because he was trying to go for a position and it didn't work, and the car snapped on him. In the Grand Prix itself, he was taken out. Wasn't he taken out by Lance Stroll? Or by somebody? He was taken out by somebody. That wasn't his fault. But unfortunately for him, on the first lap of the lap. Unfortunately those things happen. It's motor racing. It can be very cruel sometimes.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Now, talking about Oliver Behrman, you mentioned that he made his debut for Ferrari last year when he stood in for Carlos Sainz, and he scored points in his debut. Now, talking about Ferrari, the chairman of Ferrari, John Elkann, having a mouthful to say about his superstar drivers supposedly not respecting Ferrari enough or whatever, or focusing on driving and stop talking. What I don't know what to call that. Idiotic move, let's call it that.
Completely uncalled for, and one doesn't understand why he did that, to be honest. It is almost typical Ferrari, and John Elkann isn't, as far as I know, he's not Italian. So you can't even blame it on the Italian motorsport culture, and particularly the Ferrari culture. Yes, he's a lifelong Ferrari man, but still, I don't know what he means by saying that the drivers should concentrate on driving and they should speak less, or words to that effect. I cannot recall any point where the drivers strongly criticized the team and Ferrari. Yes, they've been complaining because the car is not performing, and that you would expect drivers to do that, especially somebody like Charles Leclerc, who's basically dedicated his entire, professional driving career to Formula One and to Ferrari. He's been very loyal. Lewis Hamilton, despite what he called a nightmare, has been very loyal and very positive about the outcome, the eventual outcome, and the road that the team is on, and that the hopes that he has that things will work out for them. And in fact, he said something like, he knows that something big is going to happen in the future. The chairman of Ferrari, as far as I'm concerned, should not, say stuff like that in public, because it completely undermines, I think, the morale of the team. He said so after Ferrari won the World Endurance Championship Drivers and Constructors title for the first time since whenever people can remember. And so therefore he was probably sort of on a high because of that success. And then, Comparing that to the Formula One team that's just come off a disastrous weekend in Brazil, and has dropped to fourth in the constructors' standing. Not long ago, Ferrari was lying second. So yeah, that's the kind of scenario that he was addressing. But again, somebody like the chairman of Ferrari should be much more careful about what they say, the words that they use. I mean, the car has been a bit of a dog, hasn't it? The SF25, if you think about it. The basic design fault that they have, that they cannot run the car as low as it should be run, low to the ground as it should be run, that's not the driver's fault. In fact, it's not the team principal's fault. It's a collective design fault. So you cannot point the fingers to anybody. And to point the fingers now to the drivers, basically implying that if they would just shut up, things would go better. That's just, as we know, it's complete nonsense. It kind of harks back to the old days of Enzo Ferrari. Famously, he wasn't somebody who regarded his drivers very highly. For him, it was the car and it was the engine. And, for him, it was basically, there's nothing wrong with the car, there's nothing wrong with the engine. It's the drivers that are incapable of doing or of using it to its fullest. And he would discard drivers if they didn't perform. So that's a kind of a culture, I think, that Enzo even laid down, and it's been carried on. And for us outside of Italy, we should also understand that the whole Ferrari phenomenon is so much part of the Italian culture, and specifically, the Italian media. They can be vociferous in their criticism, and that sort of creates the vibe. I can't think of another word. The vibe around the team that could either be completely, filled of adulation or completely filled with criticism. But again, the chairman of Ferrari should not fall into that trap. The media can fall into that trap. Fans can fall into that trap if they but not how you can imagine now what's going to happen in Las Vegas, right? When the team gets to Las Vegas, what is the question that is going to put to Fred Vasseur and going to be put to Leclerc and Hamilton first when they arrive there? Please, what is your reaction to John Elkann's criticism? And that's going to be, a news story that should not have been there. But
a further distraction.
Yeah, it's just so unfortunate. It's not surprising, one has to say. This is typical Ferrari, and this happened on many occasions in the past. Many occasions when the management was coming under pressure, either internally or from the media or whatever, they tend to lash out at the team and the team management and the drivers sometimes. So, but I would have expected more from John Elkann.
If you look at Ferrari's history, 2007 was the last time they won the World Championship with Kimi Räikkönen. Kimi is now a one-time world champion with Ferrari. Since then, they've had Fernando Alonso, double world champion, Sebastian Vettel, quadruple world champion. The next big thing, Charles Leclerc, and now they've had 7 times world champion Lewis Hamilton, and still they can't get it right. And I actually thought that maybe they wanted someone like Lewis in with his status and his experience and an outside voice almost to say, listen, have a look at this, that, and the other. And yet they don't want to hear it. It's like the team is above criticism.
I don't know whether they don't want to hear it internally. I mean, we know that Lewis, and he's mentioned it, and the team, I think, has acknowledged it. He has put together, a bundle of documents, basically doing exactly that. Making suggestions as how things can improve. And I'm pretty sure that his relationship with Fred Vasseur is good enough that Fred would take into account what Lewis says. They went through his junior category together, so they know each other pretty well. And I'm pretty sure that inside the team, under the leadership of Fred Vasseur, they would be open to the kind of constructive criticism, suggestions made by somebody who clearly has an outside perspective that could only be beneficial to the team. So, but I'm not a part of the inside.
Yeah, but the thing is,
of the inside of the team, and they are under Fred. They are sort of keeping a united front when confronted with stuff like this by the media, and it's difficult to gauge. But I think one can be pretty sure that if Ferrari fails to perform or be competitive next year with a new dispensation, then I'm pretty sure, and the history of Formula One of Ferrari, shows then I would imagine things would change. I don't think anything is going to change, despite what Elkann says in terms of management shake-ups or whatever, or drivers leaving before the end of the season. Like, I cannot see that happening. But give or take the first 6 months or so of next year, and Ferrari fails to be competitive, who knows?
Yeah, you see, the thing is, you talked about Fred Vasseur. The problem with Ferrari, I think, is this meddling in it from upper management and family members.
But it's always been like it.
That's the thing. It's not the driver. Even Fred Vasseur, his hands are tied behind his back because someone else will come in and sort of have a say. And there's too many chefs in that kitchen. I think that's the problem, And
that is what Jean Todt was able to stop. And that is why they've been successful. I cannot understand how Ferrari's senior management cannot learn these lessons from the past.
Basics.
The one time when they left the team alone to do what they knew they needed to do, and they had the right people to do it when Jean Todt was in charge. We know it as the Michael Schumacher era. Things worked well. They haven't had that ever since Todd and Braun and those guys left, and Schumacher. So they haven't had that situation. Fred is trying to do that. I mean, he's been recruiting for the last 2 or 3 years, 2 years at least, trying to get the correct people in there. And the car was competitive last year, but it's not been competitive in this latest era, the 2022 era. Who knows what's going to happen? There are rumors coming from Maranello saying that the next year's car is radically different in terms of its design concept, its suspension system, and stuff like that. So we'll see.
Just in closing, you talked about, you don't think things will change. Ferrari's got a history. Remember Alan Prost saying that Ferrari's a dog? They fired him in the middle of the season. You never know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think in this, these days when the drivers know to count their words very carefully, you will not get an Alan Prost who says the car's a donkey and then gets fired and then has to sit out a year after that before he comes back to another team and wins the world championship. I don't think any of the current drivers will say something as drastic as that. Maybe, well, definitely not in public. Who knows what they say, internally. But yes, it has happened in the past. I cannot see either Charles or Lewis, doing a similar thing.
I just want to close a loop here with the Oliver Behrman thing that I started with. I've said it last week, I think, as well. Lewis looks to me like a dejected man, someone who's doesn't want to be there anymore. Doesn't have the heart. It looks like it. I'm an outsider.
Yeah.
I wonder what the chances are of him calling it quits early and someone like Behrman getting promoted. But again, a poison chalice to a degree, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I think I've said it on many occasions in the past. I think Lewis is there for the long run. I think, maybe expectations, and I included myself in that, our expectations about his performance at Ferrari this season were far too high, realistically. And in practice, we have now seen it's not as simple as that. To just, change teams and to be competitive immediately. The cars are just far too different in terms of their natures. And Lewis has also said on many occasions, yes, we are struggling this year, but we are working on in the longer term. He's expecting much more from next year. There was a story that, we don't know exactly how long Lewis's contract with Ferrari is, but apparently it is 3 years, so 25, 26, and 27. Obviously, there will be options there. Because he was asked, when do you expect to start renegotiating your contract? And he said, normally it happens in the year before your contract expires. He was then asked, so when are you going to start renegotiating next year? And he said, no, not next year. And asked the year after, he said, no. So, all indications are that he's going to be at Ferrari. The intention is for him to be at Ferrari for a longer time. But yes, I think, as in all contracts, there are always escape clauses or options by both the team and the driver. So if things don't work out, there's no point in a team forcing a driver to stay there, because if he's unmotivated, he's not going to bring along the results. They're not going to they're not going to benefit from that, and the same thing. Why would the driver want to stay at a team that doesn't want him to be there? So all these contracts are obviously, I'm not saying breakable, but endable by both parties.
Okay, next week we'll talk about it. Las Vegas and a triple header coming up. Las Vegas, of course, and Lando made it quite clear the McLarens are not favorites at Las Vegas. They didn't do well last year, and he doesn't expect them to do well this year either. And what I liked about this Lando was the fact that he spoke his mind. I like this, a bit of a tougher side to me. Always comes across to a degree like a little, very immature or very young, inexperienced, not immature. And I like this kind of a bit more steely attitude of his.
I think this environment lets people grow up very quickly. If you look at what just the outside appearance, just the faces of these guys when they started, just a couple of years ago, they looked like kids. They looked like young boys, even schoolboys in some occasions. Look back at what Max Verstappen looked like when he joined.
He was 17 or something.
He was 16 or 17, whatever. And now look at the way that they look. They look like men. They look like grown-up men, even though they're still in their early and mid-20s. And it's the environment. It makes you grow up pretty quickly. It makes you mature pretty quickly. So same would go with Lando, especially because his championship bid is working for him. I think that would give him the self-confidence that he would be more mature in the way that he judges himself, the way that he judges the environment that he's in the way that he approaches things. Just before I forget about the Las Vegas Grand Prix, please remember in South Africa we are going to see that race in every session 2 hours earlier than last year.
Yes.
Last year, we just they brought it earlier for various, I think, television contract reasons, or to make it more accessible for various audiences at the time. So, last year in South African time, I'm not talking about the Las Vegas time. The South African time last year for the Grand Prix on Sunday was 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. It is now 6 o'clock on Sunday morning. So be prepared to get up very early and maybe go to bed afterwards as well. So. Yeah. Just don't forget that. Check your times. It's not the same as last year, 2 years earlier.
I would have preferred 8 o'clock.
Well, exactly. So just make sure of that. And I did double check on our sports broadcasters as well. That is in fact the time in South Africa. So McLaren maybe not being that competitive, and I think Oscar is going to struggle as well. Unfortunately, because it's a very low grip surface, and we know.
He doesn't like that.
We had a deep discussion about that. He doesn't like low grip surfaces. So hopefully Oscar can put into practice the lessons that he's learned how to drive the car in low grip conditions. They can put that into practice on the streets of Las Vegas. So certainly something that one has to look out for.
Okay, Hendrik, thanks for that. Next week we'll do a proper preview of that Las Vegas night race. It's always exciting, even though it might be an awkward time, but I like watching that race. So thanks for this, and I'm looking forward to next week, man.
Yep, me too. Cheers.
The F1 Focus Podcast with MV Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.